About a week ago, I sat down to begin writing this episode. We'd just had Mother's Day, and after reading a compelling piece from author Anne Lamott, I decided not to celebrate Mother's Day, and I let my kids off the hook. And as I've been exploring celebration days in this podcast, the concept of Mother's Day seemed like an apt topic to explore. So I began writing, which led me back to a time many years ago. And I read for a while, and when I was maybe 2/3 done, I stopped for the day, satisfied that I now knew what I would be writing about in this episode. But over the next day or so, I began thinking about how I was losing my mojo around this practice of a secular Sabbathy Sunday. Something was off kilter, and I felt a need to fess up to you, dear listener, but also to understand, to explore. And so I started to write about it, trying to figure out what was happening, because I thought if it's happening to me, it might happen to other people, and trying to understand why and what I might do to develop a practice. But that word practice, it's a big one, loaded with expectations and failures, and so I felt compelled to head off down a rabbit hole to muse on what I've learned about habits and practices, including my long experience smoking cigarettes and the stony path of giving them up. Eventually I came back to the vexed question of vapid Sundays, and I wrote my way to a list of 3 questions I wanted to explore. What does it mean that something is sacred to us? What do we gain from a practice of sacralizing aspects of life? If it's positive, how do we nurture these practices? All in a lazy 15-minute podcast episode. But by some time between lunch on Wednesday and breakfast on Friday, I read something that said May was the flower moon. And a whole host of questions rushed into my mind. Where did that name come from? What cultures have moon names? What was the name for our time of year in the southern hemisphere? Because it sure as heavens isn't flower season. And finally, I decide that this is what the episode's going to be about, moon names. And all of those other writings will maybe serve, hopefully, as inspiration or shortcuts for future episodes. And this is how it goes in the writing of almost every episode. Welcome to Tied to the Moon, a podcast about exploring ways we can align our lives more closely with the rhythms of nature. My name is Kate Lawrence, and I am your host. Many cultures and eras have given names to aspects of the natural world that we now don't notice, and we certainly don't name them, or what was common knowledge has now become specialist knowledge. Some things apply to universal phenomena like the name of a spring tide and a neap tide. Some relate to a natural phenomena with local variations like the names of frosts. In Australia we have hoar, black, killing and rime frosts. And some are very localised like the Santa Ana wind in Southern California. And when it comes to moons, there's quite a range of names and naming practices from specific cultures and eras. Most of these lunar names relate either to an aspect of nature like spring flowers or the first frost, or an aspect of human activity due at that time of year like sowing or harvesting. All the names I could find come from the Northern Hemisphere. As far as I could discover, Australian, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, while they have an incredibly deep and complex knowledge, understanding and relationship of the cosmos, they didn't name lunar cycles. So here are some of the names from various cultures taken from November, which is the equivalent to our May. For the ancient Celts, first moon after Samhain was either the morning, as in grief, mourning, oak or dark moon. For Native American Indian, the possibilities include beaver, dark, frost, tree and snow moons. The Inuit people from the Arctic named the moon the freezing mist moon, although given how many words they have for snow, surely something has been lost in the translation there. And the Chinese called this moon simply white moon. My first thought for a name for the moon in May where I live was frost moon. We get decent frosts here, and in May they begin to land more steadily. But then looking around, I was struck by another more compelling idea, and in an instant I decide to call the moon in May in my part of the world fungi moon. This is the month when autumn rains allow a spectacular array of growths to push up through the earth in fairy circles, in colonies on rotting logs, jutting out from the sides of trees like spaceships, glowing iridescent with intricate gills and gullets, slimes and soots. Fungi is one of the last frontiers of biological knowledge. Species are still being discovered, let alone understood. While I've seen some beautiful fungi, I am blown away by some of the images taken by amazing photographers, some expert, some amateur, and I highly recommend the website and the gallery page in particular of Fungi Map Australia. 1 moon down, 11 to go. Or so I thought. For probably the first 50 years of my life, I had a bit, maybe a lot, of prepper in me. You know, survivalist, a doomsdayer, plotting and planning and preparing for the end of the world. I blame the Depression and how it affected my parents, who then influenced me. For many years, I lived in Richmond, an inner city suburb of Melbourne with a slight gangster history. I lived a perfectly law-abiding life. In fact, I was a practicing lawyer at the time. But that didn't stop me spending many hours almost mindlessly taking note of all the lanes and alleyways and routes around Richmond and imagining how I would escape either on foot or by car if I was being chased by the police. When I learned about climate change, I upped my game in the vegetable growing department. We installed water tanks and I began stockpiling food, always expecting the crisis, where there would be no power, no supply chain and no water. Then, when we moved out of the city to live smack bang in the middle of some of the most bushfire-prone forests in the world, and I got a job with the Country Fire Authority as a community educator. I felt like I'd found a legitimate outlet for all of these preoccupations. Although my issues with authority and hierarchies meant that I was not really suited to such a semi-military organisation, even if it had been functional. A year or two later, I managed to get some funding to develop and deliver a pilot in 3 communities of a program called Weather the Storm Women Prepare. It was for groups of women in community to come together over a number of weeks and discuss and learn about the various threats they and their community might face and how they could best prepare, both physically and psychologically. Whittlesea Council were keen to host one of the pilots, but instead of choosing one of their many rural communities, as I expected, they asked me to deliver it in a brand new housing estate. I said, sure, we can do it in an urban setting. Why not? They'll have threats and disasters. We'll be able to plan our stockpiling together. So in the group, we brainstormed threats and they looked at house fires and escape routes out of the estate. But we ran out of ideas fairly quickly. And so, as the weeks wore on, I went looking for other risks, Googling the area and trying to find things that might be dangerous. I was pretty excited when I found that there was a large mains gas pipe that ran along two sides of the estate. And we spent a good hour or so contemplating what they would do if it ever leaked or exploded. Then, as I was poring over a Google Earth map, I saw an almighty roofed area just south of the estate. I almost rubbed my hands with glee. Now I would really have something for them to consider. Whatever this was, it would surely have some potential danger to nearby residents if there was an accident. Eventually, after triangulating the roads and doing some great sleuth work, I discovered that it was a mushroom factory. All I'll say is that I had to work really hard to make that mushroom factory appear in the slightest way scary. As I hope by now we all understand, I am an overthinker. Not a particularly deep thinker, just an insistent thinker with a darting mind. And so at the end of a story about a mushroom factory inspired by the idea of fungi moon, I find myself at the feet of another candidate for the May moon. It's in the month of May when all of us in southeastern Australia who live in a high bushfire risk area can say that the fire season is done, for better or worse. We can now have some months of reprieve from the risk. So, other names for the May moon, apart from fungi moon and frost moon, might be fire out moon, or fire done moon, or fire down moon. 3 possible names, all beginning with F. Maybe one for April, one for May, and one for my first grandchild born on the full moon after Semaine. Please feel free to jump on the Tide to the Moon Facebook group. I would be so thrilled. And put your 2 bobs worth in as to what you would name the full moon where you are for May or June or any month. There's absolutely no reason we can't all have our own names for moons, change from year to year if we like, or copy someone else's moon. And on the Storyground website, if you go to Tide to the Moon, you'll find the show notes for this episode, which is where I've put some links to where I sourced the information about moon names and also a couple of other websites about fungi. Thanks for listening to Tide to the Moon. If you like this podcast, please rate and review it on iTunes or wherever you listen, and tell other people about it. And if you have any ideas, suggestions, requests, comments or feedback, I would love to hear from you. You can find the show notes and contact details at storyground.com.au. The music for this podcast is by Danya from Audio Jungle. This podcast is a production of Storyground and me, Kate Lawrence, and it's made on the traditional lands of the Gunung Willumbullock at the foot of Mount Macedon, 65 kilometres northwest of Melbourne, Australia.